Welcome to the Which Way Is Up show with Michi and Scott. I'm Michi.
And I am Scott. The message is clear: anti-racism, anti-capitalism, anti-imperialism in order to dismantle the colonized mindset. The Which Way Is Up show offers us an opportunity to engage in the public conversation while being critical about social concerns in an effort to become more engaged citizens. You and I often talk about media literacy and misinformation, disinformation, and we kind of communicate the importance of this, especially when it comes to social media. And the media literacy field and the academics behind media literacy is nothing new. It's been around before social media, and it's kind of a general discussion, and not generally, I mean, people can actually study it and communicate. When people going for degrees in communication and things like that, they really get into, the types of media, the types of messaging, the purpose of messaging, propaganda, all that stuff. But when we start getting into the critical cultural disinformation, which is, I think, our passion and excitement around this topic comes in, because it's not just about being more responsible media consumer. This is about how misinformation and disinformation is also impacting marginalized communities and work that we're passionate about. So, because I think when we talk about it or we bring it up towards, a certain segment in our shows, it's not really a sexy topic. It's not where it's like, everybody's, like, oh,
it
wow.
Can be.
Yeah, it can be. But we're trying to, make it a little sexy, hopefully. But yeah, it's not really something that grabs people's attention right away. It's not something that directly linked to gossip or, just what's going on right now.
I think that it goes deeper than that. I don't think it's that people don't find it interesting. I think that it's a difficult topic to grasp because you really have to think about the role that the media has played in forming who we are as a nation, right? Like, just, there's always been stories of, like, when radio first came out, like, literally families would sit around the radio all day, listen to shows, because there was no TV. They would get news about what was happening. And it wasn't like when you kind of watch old movies or whatever, or even when you hear old news reports, they're very like, tick, 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 tick. You hear the sound in the background, right? And then it's like very factual, bullet pointed. It was sensationalized, but that was because there was nothing else. So you had to grab people's attention. And so they'd be like, breaking news, da, da, da. So it sounded dramatic, but there was no like fluff or extra, or so people thought. And so, this is what you're saying, is that media literacy has been a topic forever, since it was radio, since it was TV, but then especially once printed has always been there. But this is where we've always gotten our information. And so now what we're saying when we talk about media literacy is that we've been lied to, that there's a potential that our trusted news sources and that whoever it is that's being covered or who's sharing this information information with us has been lying to us. And a lot of people really do put their, like, Dan Rather lied to me, like, who wants to, come to terms with that? So there's something deeper happening, because then people also start to think, okay, well, then if I can't trust ABC, NBC, CBS, MSN.com, then who can I trust? Where can I go to get my information? That's where media literacy and mis and disinformation study gets sexy. Because if you know how to navigate that, if you know how to ask questions, which we'll talk about at the end of the show, then that's where you become an educated consumer of media.
Exactly. And just to go back a little bit to where you talked about, the invention of radio and the attention that it was given at the time, because it was a really big thing. So yeah, there were families gathered around the radio. And then, after some time, the same thing with television.
Right.
where even with the news, where people gathered around the television at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, the evening news or whatever, to get informed. And what really kind of threw a monkey wrench into this whole thing is the invention of social media.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So even the media literacy scholars really had to regroup and re-strategize because of not only of the 24-hour news cycle that we have now, which also came in right before the internet, in the 90s, where before it was 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock news. And next thing you know, we have CNN going 24 hours a day.
Right.
And then Fox News came behind them. And then all the other ones, MSNBC and so on, as far as the corporate control media is concerned.
Right.
So, the scholars, the media literacy scholars had to regroup, re-strategize, and start thinking in a more fast-paced environment of how, and then when social media becomes involved, then it's, it just really ups the stakes as far as the importance of, getting this information out and trying to encourage the general public to be more responsible media consumers. So just to recap, misinformation and disinformation, we explained over the course of many shows that, misinformation is pretty much general information that's passed along that can either be false or misunderstood and being shared by people that don't understand that it might be false, it might be a lie, it might be misinterpreted and might be put in the app, put out there in order to confuse people. And disinformation is the deliberate spreading of false information or, half truths. If, I hate that word, but half true information or misunderstood information, usually by bad actors that want to profit off of it or gain power. There's always a motive for it. Well, there's actually reasons why people are deliberately pumping disinformation into the, the public discussion. So today we're talking about cultural misinformation and disinformation. And I just want to break down these definitions a little bit deeper. And this is defined by the National Black Cultural Information Trust. And they define cultural misinformation as false information surrounding cultural issues or topics spread unintentionally. So it's pretty much what we said basically about misinformation, but it's attached to cultural issues. And we'll talk a little bit about what cultural issues are and what they look like throughout the show. And they define disinformation as false information that is intentionally shared, usually to create confusion or manipulate target audiences. People, organizations, or governments that spread disinformation often do so deliberately to control perceptions or to cause confusion among their target audiences. So cultural disinformation is centered around cultural issues. And we talked a few weeks ago about populations that are vulnerable to, these strategies that are put out by these bad actors. And we talked about tapping into people's anxiety. So when we're talking about cultural issues, we're talking about anxieties related to trauma that certain groups, a lot of marginalized groups, different groups have suffered, and these bad actors are able to tap into their anxieties and using that trauma to their advantage, where the information becomes more relatable, more believable, and where people won't take a time to pause, right? We talked about that, pausing, and being able to really process what's being put in front of them before they decide to just share it with their family, friends, and their followers that they have online. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think also something else that came up in another conversation we had was cultural disinformation, like you said, preys on some event, history that occurred. They tap into that to, conjure up fear and what have you. And it is a total power play. And so it's not that we discredit that, like if it happened, it happened. You can't erase that. But you also have to have context. And so I had mentioned this, like I said, in a conversation that you and I had, is that that bringing that up removes the issue outside of its context. You can't compare what is occurring globally to a bad choice that the government made, however many years, 70 years ago, and one that was supported by unscrupulous pharma, let's say, or some, scientists in a region of the country where there's like prevalent, KKK or, whatever. Again, you have to take things into context. Did those things happen? Yes. But is that what's happening now? No. And, even in therapy, there's ways that for post-traumatic stress, this is a constant exercise that people have to do is, okay, we're totally get that you had this experience, but is that happening now? Ground yourself. Is it happening now? No. Okay, good. Because really that's what, post-traumatic stress is, right? It is taking you back. But realistically, is it happening now? Are you in harm now? No, it's just that the mind is there. So again, it's not to discredit. We're not saying that these things didn't happen. We're not saying that we're going to ignore them, but we have to put it into context. There's a global pandemic. Everybody's going through this. It's not an isolated, targeted, event. So yeah.
I think it's really important what you just said as far as us acknowledging the trauma, not dismissing the trauma, not trying to say that it's not legit. Like, yes, these things happen. There were some horrible things that have happened to many different groups throughout the history in this country and globally, right?
Right.
Because I think that's when you start tapping into some of that and you're trying to provide some clarity, I think people, their defense mechanisms go up and, the first thing they say is, are you trying to minimize what happened to my people? Or, and it's like, no, we're not. We're trying to highlight how the trauma, what took place, what happened, which were true and factual events that we learned, throughout time, and how people are taking those facts that in those events that happen out of time, and they're attaching it to things that are not true in order for more people to believe it and to make it more believable.
Right.
So,
and ultimately the goal in doing that is to further weaken the very people that they claim to care so much about. Oh my goodness, because they did this to your people. You can't, what I'm saying? Like, and a lot of times it doesn't even come with like the sympathy. It comes with the anger, like to incite the anger. Are you going to let them do this to your people again? And it's like,
yes.
Yeah. So it's like, and the only reason they're doing that is because they don't want you, for example, to get a vaccine that's going to save your life so that you can die because they don't care.
Yeah. And we,
like
and
to
we're
just put it bluntly.
Yeah. We're going to talk, that's important. and obviously we're talking about COVID related issues and vaccines, even though we're going to go into more stuff. Yes. But because we're bringing that up because this is the moment that we're in right now.
Yeah. And there's a correlation between the two things that we're going to discuss. And one of them is like live and in action right now. So yeah.
So to revisit an article that we brought up a few weeks ago, just a few episodes ago, it is a article that we talked about as far as the title of it is Critical Disinformation Studies, History, Power, and Politics. And I wanted to revisit it because it's a really, really good essay written, and it taps into not just misinformation, but it's describing disinformation as critical studies. And I'm just going to read a portion of the intro of the essay where they describe it as a critical approach to disinformation research that is grounded in history, culture, and politics, and lifts questions of power and inequality. In the United States, identity, particularly race, plays a key role in the messages and strategies of disinformation producers and who disinformation and misinformation resonates with. Expanding what counts as disinformation demonstrates that disinformation is a primary media strategy that has been used in the US to reproduce and reinforce white supremacy and hierarchies of power at the expense of populations that lack social, cultural, political, and economic power. The essay argues that analyses of disinformation are more effective when they include grounded disinformation studies in history, society, culture, and politics, centering analysis on what I just mentioned, how social differentiations such as race, gender, and class shape dynamics of disinformation, foregrounding questions of how institutional power and economic, social, and cultural and technological structures shape disinformation, and stating and maintaining explicit commitments to justice and equality. Disinformation has historically empowered the dominant group's perspective. Historically, the authors highlight European imperial powers used images, speech, and text to reinforce who was the colonizer and who was colonized, and established racial hierarchies, dehumanizing indigenous peoples and delegitimizing indigenous histories, knowledge, and societies. Social and political actors used to legitimize and validate social inequality. So let's just process that for a minute, because it's a lot there. But they're highlighting that there's been this is not just limited to the social media age, that throughout history there have always been powerful forces that have not necessarily have to be limited to violence, but also understand the importance of delegitimizing cultural histories and tradition, and the purpose. And why do they do this? The purpose of this is to get the general public on board.
Right.
If you think about, let's say, police violence, just to bring it a little more into today day and age, if you think about police violence, when the local news or the national news, they get wind of a story, which is usually directly from the police, right? Mm-hmm. The police release statements,
right?
And it's usually attached with the person that's the victim is usually includes their criminal background, what they were suspected of doing. They're labeled as a suspect and not a victim, right? So that's important, because when the general public is taking in that information, then it's a dehumanizing process where their life is not as valuable because they are a suspect, because they were arrested 5-10 years ago for this and this crime, so they must have been up to no good when this incident took place.
Well, it's also like how and I just became aware of this, I want to say maybe about a year ago. About a year ago, when Derek Chauvin went on trial for killing and murdering George Floyd. In the past, everyone all over would have been calling it the George Floyd trial, like as if he was the one on trial for doing something wrong. And I specifically remember someone saying, and I forgot who it was, it might have been like Sean King or, Lee Merritt or one of the, people on the front lines of that movement, who said, George Floyd is not on trial. He was the victim here. We need to call it the trial of whoever it is who's on trial. And I remember myself, like, really, it took an effort for me I had to stop. And the Derek Chauvin trial, because I was real quick, the George Floyd trial, and it's like, we know what we're talking about, but he's not on trial. And then it made me think, what does that do to the community? That, it's very subliminal. And this is why it's so important to do it, is because, and all across the media, it was the George Floyd trial. But no, he's not on trial. Derek Chauvin is, and that's how I'm referring to it. And anybody that hears it out of my mouth is going to hear it that way, hopefully, so that something triggers. But go ahead.
And
I didn't mean to interrupt.
You think about specifically with George Floyd's murder and that trial where and this is not by accident, that you were meant to start referring to what was happening as the George Floyd trial.
Absolutely.
It's interesting if you take a look at the messaging that went on there, where the narrative became about George Floyd's drug use or past drug use, right? They were even saying that he died from an overdose, right? And then his supposed tox reports were put into the stream, into the public stream. And so that, and people that didn't pause, right, just took that information, on head value and kind of went with it, where I seen people arguing on social media like he didn't, this is for the people that continue to defend what happened, because a lot of people, let's just be fair, a lot of people, even police or whatever was like, no, that shit was wrong, he killed that man. But there's still a group, there was still a group, that were traditionally holding on to their values, their back to blue values. And they were saying, first of all, when you have an overdose, when someone's overdosing, they're not talking, right? They're literally going into a deep state of unconsciousness or whatever. And a lot of times they're gurgling, like they're gasping, like there's no talking. Like people are not saying, can you help me? I'm overdosing. That's not happening. So, but and everybody may not have that knowledge or whatever, but it's important for people that do have it to pump it in there. It's like, no, that's not an overdose, because
absolutely
that man was begging for his life practically. So, it wasn't an overdose. What's also interesting, I found, is it was said that, he struggled with opioid use. I don't know if it was current at the time or he was, it was past drug use or whatever, but we're in this moment now where the opioid epidemic has been deemed a medical crisis, right? And we know why, right? Because it's been impacting not only rural America, but mostly people that are not of color, of the dominant group, where it's really taking them out, in large numbers. But for that moment, we went back to the old crack era version of drug addict, because it was a Black man, and he was being dismissed as just being a drug addict anyway.
Right.
So his life really doesn't matter, or he was probably up to no good, and that's why what happens. And let's just say that he did that, because I believe they were saying that he passed off a counterfeit bill or tried to in that store. Let's say he did try to do that, right? That doesn't warrant a death sentence.
No doubt.
Right? First of all, there's no violence involved, right?
Yeah.
So, and even if he got into a fight with that store clerk or whatever, even if he beat up that store clerk, once he was engaged by the police and he got to a point where he was in a submissive position, taken into custody, right? That there's no reason why he should be dying because of whatever allegedly happened. So that's just an example of the dehumanizing in current times, and this is something that's happened. And I'm going to tell you about how this has happened throughout history, where these type of narratives that, are usually lead to violent responses by law enforcement and the general public, such as lynchings, the Fugitive Slave Act, the drug war, the crime bill, welfare reform. These are all things that are pumped into the public conversation in order to gain public support. And it works amazingly well, where, people, they're so easily swayed by, whatever their method of media consumption is. They just take it on face value.
They question nothing. They question nothing.
Right. Yeah. And that is concerning, and, you think about the polling when it comes to elections, and a lot of people have lost faith, and some people never believed in the polling as far as the science behind that and how that works. And I even had to, take a look and kind of revisit what I think about polling or whatever. And first I got to recognize that it's science, it's something that I don't know about, that there are trained professionals that do the polling. But a common sense vision came to me with polling is you're polling a certain group or a certain amount of people, shortly before an election to kind of get the feel of who's going to win, how close the race is or whatever. And then you have what's called the October surprise, right? What used to be some type of drama or scandal that's released into the public right before the election, that used to work until Trump ran, because that used to work flawlessly, where that one scandal, and it something that could have happened 5-10 years ago, that one scandal is able to shift public opinion instantly, right? So then the outcome of the election looks a lot different than the polling did right before the election. And it's like, no, I think it's not necessarily limited to the accuracy or the science behind the polling. It's just that the people's opinion, the general public opinion, is so easily swayed
by the media.
Yes.
By the media and what they throw out there. And it's usually the opponent who, I'm sure, conveniently found this info from 5-10 years ago. But anyway, that's another topic. Go ahead. I'll let you.
Yeah. So let's get into a little more of these meat and potatoes that we got lined up here. So I want to talk about a group called National Black Cultural Information Trust that I talked about briefly as when I just, explained the definitions of cultural misinformation and disinformation. And I just want to tell you a little bit about who they are. I'm going to read their mission statement. The NBCI Trust is a Pan-African initiative that uses communications, media, and cultural storytelling to share information and resources that correct and challenge cultural misinformation and disinformation surrounding racial, ethnic identity, anti-Blackness, and other false narratives that harm our communities, sow distrust and confusion around issues such as voting, reparations, police violence, etc. Now, one of the issues that they are attacking, and what you and I are bringing up, is issues related to COVID-19. So if you think about some of the narratives that were put out early 2020, when we had the initial outbreak, remember they were saying Black people were immune to the virus. That was being pumped into the to the universe, so to speak, right? Because mind you, it hadn't spread into every corner and every pocket of this country at the time. So you're talking about maybe March, April, where we're hearing about it on the news, but for most of us, it hasn't really hit home yet. And I've, now, first of all, I never entertained that thought that, Black folks are immune to that or whatever. And at the same time, nobody that I knew in my immediate circle or even on my social media feeds had yet been impacted by it. But I wasn't going to entertain that. But I did see people sharing that on my timelines, in my news feed. Black folks, were entertaining that. So if you think about how dangerous that is in regard to COVID, especially with the limited information that we had at the time, that's scary, So we move on a little bit to now that we get to the point where we get vaccines. The NBCI Trust, they also highlight how there was a lot of reference to the Tuskegee Experiment when it came down to the COVID vaccine. And let's acknowledge the Tuskegee Experiment for what it is. Like we said, we're going to do. We're not going to dismiss it.
Can you just briefly explain For those who don't know.
Right. So the Tuskegee experiment was an experiment. Well, first of all, let me say what was being said about it. Where
Okay.
as far as distrust for the COVID vaccine and it being labeled as a government experimentation, they were saying that, and we've seen it in the media feeds where they were like, remember what happened with Tuskegee, and it was kind of a signal to Black and African American folks, like, remember what happened. So the Tuskegee experiment was an experiment where they wanted to observe the effects of syphilis, right? So the perception was that they were injecting people with syphilis in order for them to display the symptoms and the effect and the impact of the syphilis virus. And that's not what it was. It was people that were already infected that they wanted to observe. The issue behind the Tuskegee experiment is that they offered them no treatment, in order to be able to watch how that disease progresses and impacts people. And even during that experiment that went over the course of decades, the cure became, they discovered the cure, which was penicillin. And they didn't tell the participants in that, they didn't tell them they had a cure because they wanted to still see the disease progress, was ultimately left, a lot of them died. Right.
So they weren't intentionally injected.
No. Now,
okay, you see, that's what I always thought it was.
Exactly, because
I didn't pause. Right. I didn't do my research.
But to be fair, through my research, in Guatemala, there was similar experiment going on that involved the U.S. government along with the Guatemalan government, where they were purposely infecting people with syphilis. In another country. So we're not letting the government off the hook here.
Oh, no,
definitely not.
No, yeah, but I just wanted to point out, like, the context, again, like, this is
right. So I mean, and if you think about it, if they got the cure, right, and this is where one of the incidents and one of the cases that really led to laws around informed consent, where if people are going to volunteer for studies, medical studies, that they need to know the risks, they need to know the possible outcomes or whatever. Right. And that's clearly not that didn't happen there, because if those people would have found out that a cure became available during the course of their, they would have been like, I think I want that, study over, like, that's okay. You got what you need. It's over with now. But they weren't afforded that opportunity. So taking that trauma, that cultural trauma, and attaching it to COVID vaccines, it's very easy for us. And the reason why I learned the details of it was I did a paper in school talking about certain studies like that. So that's how I got to learn about it. And then I was like, and then once this, the COVID vaccine came up, and I started seeing these memes talking about Tuskegee experiment, and then the term experiment itself, it's it's a
bit misleading.
Yeah.
So it was an incident. And actually, I'm in my notes. I got how things were titled.
Yeah, and yeah. So so I just wanted to touch on that, because that type of disinformation is attached to historical fact and is put into a meme, right? It's put into a meme, it's put into a headline. And we talked about the fast brain, remember?
We did.
We talked about the fast brain and how it is in autopilot. So when you're going through a social media feed, it only takes a second to take it really, to take in what that meme says or whatever. And if it looks halfway decent, you're going to take that as fact.
Well, your fast brain also is the one that's like triggered. It's like fear, trauma. So anything that has to do with those, your fast brain's going to take it, hold on to it. And that's what it is.
Right.
That's what you said anyway.
And sometimes it's interesting because not necessarily memes, but you can look at headlines that could be designed to be what's called clickbait, trigger you where you click. If for people that bother to click, right? Sometimes the truth might be in the article, right? It's just framed a certain way in the headline to get you to read and learn. But a lot of people don't do that. They just click share, because they read the headline, they got triggered, and they do that. And they, it's just this vicious cycle of sharing the headline over and over, which is not completely accurate or completely inaccurate,
And and this is why we use the words misinformation and disinformation, because there's the difference. Misinformation is, and I'll go back so that I don't say something that wasn't said, but misinformation is false information surrounding cultural issues or topics that spreads unintentionally. And so that's a good example. There's an article that has some headline, but when you actually read the article, you see that the headline is like a really catchy summarization to get you to read the article, but what a lot of people think is that this is what it is. A good example of that is a couple weeks ago, I told you that, and I think I discussed it while on the podcast, that, a friend of mine had shared an article about a study that was done that women were reporting that, their cycles were being impacted by the vaccines, and, she shared it and she was like, oh my God, is this true? And I'm like, and I had seen the article before. And naturally, when I saw the article, I clicked it and I read it because I was like, okay, hold on, this is relevant to me. And the article was actually extremely informative. It told me everything I needed to know about what the topic was. And I was like, oh, okay. You know what I'm saying? Had I not done that, had I stayed at the article headline, I totally would have been, like, oh my God, I'm not going to get it. I need to read it and then see what's going on. Whereas disinformation is where they would take something like that, take that article, share it and be like, oh, because remember when, and attach it to something else to just incite more fear, to ensure that fast brain stays in control at all times, that no pause happens, that no consideration of context takes place.
Or if you're thinking about bad actors, where they can take that article with some accurate information, but that with a misleading headline, and just take a screenshot of it, right? We talked about this, you and I, about, how we're suspicious of screenshots that are being shared as news or public safety alerts or whatever. And if you take a screenshot of the face of that article with the headline and you share it, people don't have the immediate option to click and read because there's nothing there. It's a picture, right? And if they don't bother to take that headline and type it into their search bar and look into it further, which most people are not going to do because most people don't got time because they need to continue to be scrolling on that, stuck into that infinite scroll pattern, So most people are not going to do that. And these people, these powers, these bad actors know that, they know that you're just going to, you're not only that you can't even click on the screenshot, but you're just going to take that screenshot and you're just going to share it.
You and I saw one of those screenshot things the other day, and I don't know if you went a little deeper the way I did. It was the map. There was a map that we saw someone shared about, God, what was it? Human trafficking.
Yeah.
And the map,
which is a cultural,
legitimate concern,
trauma. Right?
Legitimate concern. Again, let's make it clear: we are not delegitimizing any of what we're referring to. But honestly, I didn't know what the map was referring to. There was a lot of different colors. There was just a lot of, and then there was like a caption, and I was like, but what does this map mean? For all I know, this is all the successful, like human trafficking operations that have taken place, meaning in other words, they were able to like save all these people? Or is this where there's actual people being trafficked? And then how would you know that? And if you know where they are, then why aren't you like I just had a lot of questions about this map.
Right.
And I went back to the source because it was mentioned. And I went on the website and they have a lot of statistics. And I was able to get, so I'm still not clear on why the different colors, because there wasn't a breakdown. Maybe I didn't dig deep enough. But at the very least, I saw that it was a legitimate photograph. Yeah. But again, the caption that was with it didn't tell me enough about what I was looking at, and I went straight to the source and I'm still left with questions, but at least I know that who the source is now, what they do. I learned something else about it, but honestly, that's a bad actor.
Now, just out of curiosity, when you were able to track down, identify the actual source, was that an actual map that they were using, or was it?
So they actually release this map every year as part of their reporting. The map is a depiction of where there have been reports of human trafficking. And again, I wasn't able to determine what the different colors were, because they were like blue dots, green dots, red dot. Like, I don't know, is that the number of reports?
Yeah.
Or is that the number so again, that I wasn't clear on, but there were a lot of reports, a lot of different reports on that website, chock full of information. So I just didn't have time to dig deeper. I'm sure if I did, there is an explanation of all the different colors and whatnot. But again, at the very least, I had to determine whether or not that map was actually a valid map. For all I know, that was a map of the Dairy Queens across the country.
One thing about, first of all, it was great that your pause process led you to that source, and you seem to have come across a good wealth of information.
I'm actually going to share the link, because I think that the national, it's like the National Human, but I'm going to share the link so you could put it in the notes.
Even though you didn't have time to go through everything, that site exists, and if you ever become interested or you want to investigate further, like where to go, which wasn't attached to the initial post. Right?
No, I had to go outside of the initial post and do my own homework.
Yeah. And even the poster probably legitimately didn't know who the source was, because they just got that image from someone else. Obviously I'm sure they didn't create it themselves, because I know who you're talking about, and they just love some posts like that. They thrive with disinformation, so but to touch on one part, a little part about that again, and I'm gonna touch on one more thing and then I'm turning it over to you. The imaging is a big part of the disinformation in general, because that map had a lot of red highlighted on it, and that color red, we usually associate, like warning, danger, right? When we see we see maps like that with we're talking about COVID and the spread of COVID, and you see all these areas with the red. So that image, that color, is something that triggers the anxieties in us, right? That most people don't think about, which I didn't think about till I really started getting into reading about this media literacy thing, and the effectiveness of using imaging. So it's not only the words, so it's something like you just said, it's the image of the map, the breakdown of the map, the colors used in the map. So I just wanted to add that. So lastly, and going back to the National Black Cultural Information Trust, they talk about the digital blackface. I've mentioned this to some people sometimes. Like, what do you mean digital blackface, right? So I initially read about the digital blackface. There was an article in Teen Vogue about 3 years ago. And what they were describing as digital blackface was people of the dominant group, white folks, on social media using either memes or GIF images of Black people with certain comments that would appear to be associated with what a Black person would say, you know, and it would look a little awkward with a white person saying it. So they would use those images to you know, so to basically express Black thought, but it's white people using it. So they were kind of calling them out on the overuse of it. Like it wasn't like it was just something that was randomly done. They noticed the pattern of it, right? So they were using blackface to quote unquote express Black thought, but a lot of times the Black thought that they were supposedly expressing wasn't really consistent with what Black folks would say or think, but it was more in favor of the certain narrative that they were pushing in their posts, right? So I was like, oh, okay, that's pretty interesting. But the NBCI Trust, they talk about the digital blackface, and they define it as when someone that is not Black pretends to be Black online. They often use stock photos and cartoons and Black historical images, such as Martin Luther King, you know, certain quotes that he may have not said, or maybe that he did say, that were used in that meme and in that situation to be taken out of context. And celebrity photos of Black celebrities, African-American celebrities, as their profile pictures, right? They go on to say these accounts often profess to be Black. They may even say when they're commenting, as a Black man, I believe, or as a Black woman, I believe. Digital blackface is usually detected by abnormal behavior and incorrect usage of African-American vernacular English. This is interesting because before I even came across this information, I used to see this all the time online, where it's like, first of all, you got, like they said, the profile picture is of a Black person, whether it be a celebrity or just be a regular person that nobody knows. It's of a Black person. One red flag is that person has like little to no followers, right? Or that profile that's being extra in the comments was just created this morning or yesterday. Right? Those are the immediate red flags. But what they're talking about also, especially when they talk about abnormal behavior and incorrect usage of African-American vernacular English. And I'll throw this term out there, cultural incompetence, right? Because these people get extra with the behavior and language that they perceive to belong to Black people. Like they think that Black people, first of all, like I've seen people in like, you know, terms like biatch and, you know, certain terms like ebonics.
They're extra with it.
Yeah, like
they're extra with it.
So-called ebonics from the 90s, and it's like 2021, 2022. And it's like, even if there were some Black people that did talk like that, they don't talk like that anymore. Like you're way off. You're decades off. So I don't know if everybody just gave it that much attention, but I'm like, yeah, that doesn't really make sense, you know, especially when I know that those are really old terms, and you got somebody's profile picture that looks about 21, so you weren't even around when those terms were being used, you know. So that should trigger red flags. And lastly, they highlight hashtags that were used with the digital blackface. Hashtags like hashtag walk away, which is referring to the Democratic Party, where it's the assumption that all Black people or the majority of Black people are affiliated or card-carrying members of the Democratic Party, which is just not true. Even though a majority may vote for the Democratic Party, and that's simply because the Republican Party is offering no options. Like they're just telling you walk away to what? Just walk away. And they're also describing the Democratic Party, listen to the trauma, as the plantation.
Right.
And telling Black folks, you know, you're stuck on the plantation and you need to get off of that. Not telling them where they should go and where the better option is. You just need to get off the plantation to trigger the anxieties, you know.
Right.
Also, they use hashtags like hashtag Blacks for Trump, hashtag Black Voices for Trump, right? And I've seen, and we've seen some of the imaging in the Trump rallies of the one Black dude that's there in all the rallies, all the years, that wears the Blacks for Trump T-shirt, which is definitely a paid actor, you know, and that's already been proven. But, you know, to give the impression that, now that's not to say that there aren't Black folks that voted for Trump, because there is.
I was going to say, what about Candace Owens?
Yeah. We're going to get, that's the last one. We're going to get to that right now. That's not to say it is. So we're not saying that there's no way that Blacks can vote for Trump, because we know that they did. And that's one thing they use to try to discredit you for pointing out the bullshit here. And they'd be like, oh, you're trying to say that no Blacks have voted for Trump? It's like, no, we're not trying to say. What we're trying to say is that you're trying to trigger people's anxieties to get more Black people to vote for Trump than there actually is, right? So, and that leads us to the last hashtag, which is hashtag Blexit. And what that refers to is Black people exiting the Democratic Party, which was led by Candace Owens, right? You know, just to let you know, like Candace Owens, just because I know some of you, especially some of you, you know, my friends, some of you kind of feeling Candace Owens because you think she's outspoken, you think she's got no chill, no filter or whatever. Just to let you know that she works for an agency called Turning Point USA that is not Black owned, right? She might be the only Black employee there. And what they do is, what do they do, Turning Point USA? They do media messaging, right? And their whole purpose is to build a conservative base and ultimately, you know, and draw more people, you know, people in general to the Republican Party. But Candace Owens' assignment is to attract more Black people and people of color, which she tried to do when she pulled in and latched on to Kanye West at one point. And you say what you want to say about Kanye West, and I got a lot to say about him. Maybe we'll do that in another show. But he got hip to that shit at one point. She was kind of like trying to parade him around, because if you think about it, Kanye West is a major pop figure, right?
Absolutely.
Especially with the younger generation of Black
His
folks.
star power is it's strong.
It cannot be denied, right? So I guess it was her intention that she was going to use him to be the figurehead of the Brexit movement and start attracting a younger generation of Black voters or potential voters in the Black and African American community. But I'm gonna give Kanye a little credit, you know, whether this is what happened or not. I think he got a little hip to the hustle and realized, like, I'm not gonna be your pawn here. Like, you're not gonna use me like that.
Yeah.
Because I can go anywhere I want and do my own thing.
Yeah.
Right. I don't need to be pimped that way. So he got the hell out of there. Right. He got away from her, and now she's stuck doing what she does. But that's even a legit blackface, right? So we're not even talking about a digital blackface, but a legit blackface that's being used by a power of bad actors, a agency, a corporation that's specifically designed to pump misinformation that they think may be accurate, or it may, you know, some of it may be accurate, or they put their own spin on it to favor their values and their ideology, and ultimately looking to influence and disinfluence, if that's a word. I just made it up. Disinfluence Black people and people of color in order to coerce them into coming into a certain ideology, to a certain political party that may not be to their benefit.
And I think if you just made up that word disinfluence, that's the ultimate goal of these people, is they want to diminish the influence of marginalized communities. They want to keep us in small numbers. In there, who's that lady that does all the race exercises? She's got short white hair, glasses.
Oh, the older lady.
Jane something.
Is it Jane Adams? I think.
I don't know.
But
I'm gonna find out. But yeah, she does like these really just straightforward, race-based trainings where people just get in touch with their own racial biases. And I remember they spoke to her about, why racism? And she was like, because white people are scared. They're scared. They're being outnumbered and they're scared. They're losing their influence. And so they've got to, perpetuate lies in order to make Latinos and Black people feel like, they've got to side with them. They've got to get, or like there's, the government's against you. So you got to don't do this, don't do that. No, you have to do that because that's what's going to get you the influence and the power because you got the numbers, So anyway,
quick backstory on I think it's Jane Addams, if I'm not mistaken. But
all right, I'm gonna look her up right now.
but quick backstory. She's actually a teacher. So she's retired now. I believe she does more anti-racial workshops and things like that. But
Jane Elliott.
There you go. Jane Elliott. Jane Addams is someone else. I don't know.
She's an American diversity educator.
Yeah. So she was a regular grade school teacher that ultimately turned into, an educator, covered white supremacy, anti-racism and things like that. But her whole shocking moment, her jolting moment that really led her to this work was that she was completely traumatized by the assassination of Dr. King. And we just talked, I just wanted to bring that up because we just talked about it. Wow. She was horrified by a lot of the country was at the time. She was horrified about it. And, her thing was either, I crawl up in this ball of depression and feeling sorry for myself and this and that, or what am I going to do about it? And she came up with an experiment for her class and go on YouTube and look at it because you can see the actual experiment she does back then. Then you can see her doing it as part of her workshop today. And you can also see the students that she did it back then as grown-ups reflecting on what it meant. And it was called the blue-eyed, brown-eyed experiment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Where she had her, and her class was all white. So that's why she decided to do that. And basically the people with the blue-eyed were the dominant group that got all the favoritism and the privilege. Right. And the people that were brown eyes, they had to switch places. So blue-eyed people had to pretend they were brown-eyed, and they were the marginalized group. And you can see how that it was a great experiment. It would never fly in today's society with the what's going on.
Yeah, but she actually did it. When I saw it first, I think it was Oprah who had brought her to the show, and from the minute people arrived, before the show you started taping, they were already part of the experiment and they didn't know. They were like, blondes, brunettes, and then like the blondes got to come in and sit or I think it was like the other way around. All the brunettes got to come in and they had a whole layout for them and they had like snacks and whatever. And they were like, why can't we?
And the others got to stand, you can't sit. Yeah.
It was a whole thing. And like people were crying out of frustration, because they didn't like the way they were being treated. And then that's where she dropped the bomb on them. So I love her. I always have. She actually reminds me of a professor I had in college, multicultural studies, back in the 90s when I was on that education track. It was one of the courses. It wasn't a requirement, but I took it because, so that's just me, right? So
what do you have for me? Because I'm excited. I know you got some stuff.
So you actually left off talking about how they sow distrust, COVID-19 awareness, etc. I want to talk a little bit more about something that you said, which is like how, and actually I mentioned it too, how they kind of spin information, and how they really plan certain things and plant. So I read an article, and there were two ways specifically where it impacted the Latino community. Let me backtrack. I'm going to talk about how all this impacts the Latino community because it's happened amongst us too. Specifically, more recently, when it comes to voter suppression and COVID-19. and the whole vaccination thing. So I read a really quick poll that was done, a nationwide poll on COVID-19. No, sorry, on COVID vaccine. And it was done by it came up as part of another article that I read. Hold on. The Latino Anti-Disinformation Lab.
Love it.
This is a relatively new organization that came out of the push to have misinformation and disinformation studies take place because of how it impacts voter suppression. So they did a poll of about 2,000 voters nationwide. And of those 2,000, approximately 1,000 were Latino voters. So when you look at the demographic of this country, approximately 18% of the population is Latino. However, that's according to the last census. Let us not forget that what we find a lot in the Latino community is undocumented people living in this country. And ever since I was I was very active on campus in my college days with the Latino students, and we had a close connection to what was happening with the community. We always knew that within the next 5 years, and I'm talking about 96, 97, 98, we always knew that come the new millennium, it was going to be hip to be Latino. Everybody was going to keep their eye on the Latino population, because within the next couple of censuses, it was going to be solidified that we were going to be the majority minority, right? And I only use those words in terms of numbers, not description of what we are. So the fact that this study, all that to say that, again, right now, we're 18% of the population. We know it's more than that because we know not everybody likes to take the census due to disinformation. But the fact that the study was just half Latino, I trust that these numbers are an accurate depiction of what's going on in the country with Latinos with regard to the COVID vaccine. So among the respondents who has said that they hadn't been vaccinated yet, some said that they didn't know if they were going to be vaccinated. And then some said that they weren't going to get vaccinated at all. So 72% said that they knew someone in their household or community that absolutely was like dead set against taking the vaccine because they believed it would be harmful to them. 78% of the respondents overall that said that they weren't sure if they take the vaccine or were not going to take the vaccine, 78% were under the age of 50. So that statistic really got to me because that's us. Like, we're relatively hip, happening, young, on top of things. We got access to the internet. We can go on, we can search. If we can TikTok a video, we can go and Google, we can read, we can pause, So for 78% of the respondents that weren't sure to be under the age of 50 with access to all this information, just leads me to, anyway. They talk about education levels, which I always look at because I know it has an impact. Only because of how education is administered in this country.
Sure.
People are not, the concept of logic, independent thought aren't even introduced until college. You know what I'm saying? Unless there was someone outside of the education system, or unless you had a really good teacher in like grade school or high school, there isn't a lot of, but think outside, or what else could that be? Our education system, for the most part, is read and regurgitate, read and regurgitate. We're going to show you this, take a test, you know it, good, next topic. Boom. And it's like, so I always look at education levels because like I kind of get why people are thinking the way they're thinking. 24% have a high school education or less, only 14% were college educated. That doesn't mean that college educated individuals are more logical. I'm just putting that out there.
Right.
Then they talk about language, 46% of them either speak English or Spanish. Now, one of the most common reasons that a respondent gave for not wanting to get vaccinated or being unsure about getting vaccinated is fear that the vaccine is not safe. And just bear with me while I'm throwing out these statistics because I'm getting to the point of the misinformation. 51% of the Latino respondents do not trust the vaccine offered to them will be safe. Among Latino respondents whose primary language at home is Spanish, 67% do not trust that the vaccine offered to them will be safe. So now that scares me because this is the same 67% that will walk into a clinic, need help, and probably will not get the extent of help that they need because of the language barrier. The other most commonly selected reasons are fear that the vaccine offered to them will not be effective and not trusting the companies that manufacture the vaccine. And that was like in the 39 and 32% range. 60% of Latino respondents know someone in their household or community who is unwilling to take the vaccine because they believe it will be harmful to them. Now, here's where it gets into the misinformation. 37% of the respondents have seen material or information that makes them think that the vaccine is not very safe or effective. The main source of the information is Facebook. 49% say that is where they saw the material.
Of course.
The second most common was local news. So that was the whole point of the study, was to kind of see, where were people at in terms of, why they were choosing to not be vaccinated, and then what were they basing that decision on. And they randomly sampled a percentage that's almost double the population. So I think these numbers are, pretty spot on. And for half of the people that don't want to get vaccinated to be basing that decision on information that they got on Facebook makes me want to cry. 49% of the Latino respondents think COVID misinformation is a very serious problem. Another 29% think that it's a somewhat serious problem. 20% of the respondents have had wrong or harmful information about COVID vaccine shared directly with them on Facebook and messaging apps. So when I was looking through this, I was like, what's with the messaging apps thing? And I get that a lot of people use messaging apps now. And you have to understand that my experience in terms of, a Latina from a country that, is part of the US, like my experience is not the same as the rest of the Latinos in this country. They're dealing with not having as much access to their homelands. And so messaging apps are a major way that they stay in touch with their families. Yeah, it is. Yeah. WhatsApp, especially. I really didn't get that. I thought it was just like, oh, I'm part of a big group. Like we can, so that's my own. But like, again, in looking at these statistics, I get that, these people from other countries are sharing information with people here. And, this goes back to my context comment, when I went to Florida, there's almost every restaurant is outdoors. It was easy for restaurants to very quickly throw their things outdoors, and then they didn't have to shut down, and that was something that I found, like, I was relieved when I went to visit Florida in that sense, because I could go sit at a restaurant because it was outside. And I hadn't been able to do that for a long time up here, but it's just, there's different situations. So that, that's why also, like, here we're more likely to walk around with our masks, because I'm not going to be taking it out, put it on, in the store, out in the street, in the building, out, so here is more likely that you're just going to see a person walk around with their mask no matter where they're at. We're not going to be taking them on and off. Whereas in a place like Florida, you're outside all the time. That doesn't excuse what Florida is doing either. But anyway, so I read this poll. I saw these numbers about, why the majority, well, I'm not going to say the majority, but why a large number of Latinos are choosing to not be vaccinated, how they're getting that information. And so it kind of no, it brings me to the next article I read, which was from Vote to Virus, misinformation campaign targets Latinos. They start talking about how campaigns were created, specifically Walk Away, which was a group promoted by a conservative activist, Brandon Straka, who was later arrested for participating in the deadly January 6th insurrection at the US Capitol. Apparently, he had this hashtag, Walk Away, to get people basically telling them, look, just, don't vote Democrat because they're not going to do anything anyway, throwing the misinformation out there. But like Scott said before, they're not really telling them, come to the Republican Party, because they don't want them there either. You know what I'm saying? That's just the bottom line. They don't want them there either. So, but naturally, the Latinos think that means, okay, we'll vote for Trump. And that's what they ended up doing. So in the run up to the November election, that call was a broader, largely undetected movement to depress turnout. And the way they did that was that they were telling people that ICE was going to be at the voter booths, right?
Yeah.
That's also how they that's also why we can't trust these numbers of the census. The last census says that 18% of the US population is Latino. We know it's more than that. But the reason why we can't quantify that is because the organizations like these bad actors are putting information out there that, well, if you send in the census, they're going to be able to track this, and that, and then they're going to go to your house and they're going to, and when you take the census, there's none of that. There's none of that. There's no way that they could possibly. So, it's but then that's why you also see like these flip movements happen, I remember they were paying people, Spanish speaking people, to go out and encourage people to participate in the census. We'll help you fill out the form even though the form is in Spanish, but to help. There's organizations like Voto Latino, which are like always trying to educate Latinos on, what are the issues, what are the, how to kind of look at the platforms of the candidates. But the way that they did this in terms of trying to suppress having Latinos go to the polls, they used videos and pictures that were doctored, quotes taken out of context, conspiracy theories are fanned, including that voting by mail was rigged, that the Black Lives Matter movement has ties to witchcraft, brujeria. Nobody loves, as soon as you say brujeria.
Wow.
Oh, yeah, you don't know?
I didn't know they tied BLM to that. I didn't know. Wow.
Yeah, and that Biden was beholden to a cabal of socialists, which we know for people from certain countries, that's a very hot, it's totally hijacked the Cubans in Miami. Like they're just like, no Castro. And so they go with the Republican Party. The most prominent narratives and those shared were either closely aligned with or completely repurposed from right-wing media outlets, said the report. And so let me just kind of backtrack a little though. A lot of these things were coming from other countries. So like a lot of these doctored videos and pictures, it was like they were created here among the right wing, make their way into other Latino Spanish speaking countries, and then find their way back. But now they're completely like, now they have that spin like, well, this is going to happen to us. This is about us and our community. No, it's not. It's about Mr. Brandon Straka, who's storming the Capitol, in the name of whatever it is, his freedoms. I kind of call it the wash and rinse. It goes through a wash and rinse cycle so that the right wing comes out, well, that wasn't us. But at the very basis of these, videos, pictures, memes, is a very subliminal and insidious message that, we're not hip to because that fast brain. With the election behind them, the proponents of these campaigns are now trying to spread chaos more broadly, notably by trying to create doubt about vaccines. The push is especially dangerous because, and then again, this is where I get a little emotional, Latinos have a higher chance of being infected by, hospitalized, and dying of COVID-19 than do whites, African Americans, or Asian Americans. So what it basically, the reason why I get teary-eyed is because it's working. The misinformation that they're putting out there, the trauma that they're pulling on, the fear that they're putting you in, it's working. We are dying. When I read this statistic, I spoke with a coworker. This week I went to the office for the first time since I got sick. She also got sick, so it was like a reunion. We were very happy to see each other. She's Filipina. She's from Jersey City. We're the same age, so it's like same demographic, everything. So just out of curiosity, I asked her, I said, can I ask you a question? How do you see the Filipino community responding to the vaccine? Do you feel like they don't want to get it? You know, if they don't want to get it, what's the story behind it? Like, what are they like gung-ho? They don't. And she was like, oh no, yeah. She goes, of all her family and friends, she only had one friend that didn't want to get it. And she ended up getting sick. And as soon as she got better, she went out and got the vaccine. So she's like, I currently do not know anybody. And I was like, you know, and I didn't dig my next question for her, but we were at work, so we were busy. But my next question for her was, historically, is there anything that's ever happened among the Filipino community that you could legitimately be like, okay, I can see why we would be right. Yeah. You know, but we didn't have that. And then she mentioned on her own, she said, especially amongst the elderly. She goes, all the seniors in the Filipino community want to get their vaccine. So I was like, okay.
Very interesting.
It is. And so again, I didn't get to dig deep with her, but you know, I was like, for the most part, do you think it's because people are trusting the science? She said, absolutely, we're following the science. All of our conversations have to do with the science of it and nothing else. So, okay, so I just want to talk, like, there's really, this goes back to some of the memes we were talking about, and there was a video that appeared to have originated in Panama, other ones from the Middle East that have been translated into Spanish. These all kind of, you know, when they traced it back, it all made its way back to the US. One chain features a doctored video of a late Nobel Prize winning chemist, Carrie Mullis. She's purportedly dismissing Dr. Anthony Fauci, the top US infectious disease expert, as a phony who knows nothing about virology. Another video shows a crowded street that it claims is full of Italians flaunting social distancing and mask wearing rules over the hashtag in Spanish, yo no me vacuno, or I won't be vaccinated. The vaccine disinformation may revert to more election-related falsehoods as the 2022 midterm elections come more clearly into view. Voto Latino and one of the proponents in this article that I read have partnered with the liberal online watchdog group Media Matters for America, and they poured $22 million into the Latino Anti-Disinformation Lab, which is the organization that did the poll that I just broke down to you guys. So these people, you know, got some major funding that has helped to do some research, to do some digging so that we can know how to target disinformation in the Latino community, because it's got a strong hold. And there's actually jokes about certain things that I've seen online. So for example, all my life growing up, they always said that you couldn't go out at night because you get sereno. And growing up as a kid, I just thought sereno was like something in the air that would make you sick. To this day, I don't know what that means. But, you know, disinformation and misinformation is something that's been with our ancestors have been doing that.
It's left open to interpretation.
Yeah, it's like, you know, or like there's actually some videos. There's this chick that does videos, funny videos or whatever, and one of them specifically was like she just had a baby, and like some of the things that her grandmother and her mother would say to her every time she would be, like postpartum, like you can't wash your hair, you can't get out of bed for 40 days. Like, oh, you know what I'm saying? And it's like missing disinformation in the Latino community ain't nothing new. Our grandmothers and mothers have been doing that with us for years. But this like this is on a different level, obviously, I'm gonna take a little break to let you kind of chime in, or do you want me to keep going? Because I
No, no,
got more.
I'm chime
I
in
got more.
briefly because
Go ahead.
I'm feeling that energy. I just wanted to kind of build on some of the things that you were talking about.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about specifically Latinos and Spanish speaking communities, there's a general cultural incompetence because they're, especially when it comes down to politics, where they're viewed as this one big voting block, not taking into account that there are many different cultures and nationalities and people from different regions of the globe that are very different as far as their culture, their beliefs, their ideologies. And so it's already at a disadvantage to just view the population as one big group, right?
Absolutely.
For instance, you talked about Cubans in Miami. First of all, we should acknowledge that those are anti-Castro Cubans, that there are some pro-revolution Cubans in Miami. Not many, or their voice might not be as loud. But talking about them, right? Back in the summer, we had the hashtag SOS Cuba, right? Where it started floating around, and it was basically, it went viral because there were images and some videos where there were protests in Cuba. And why is that a big deal? Because that's something that doesn't happen, not anti-government protests. That doesn't happen in Cuba. So which was happening. What wasn't happening was the way it was being portrayed on social media, the way the US corporate controlled media picked it up and kind of blew it up to being more than it was. And the pro-revolution and the government's response was, of course, they did respond to it. And there were people arrested, but there were reports of people being tortured and their fingernails being ripped out and their eyes being removed. And this was all coming from Miami, right? Or maybe Union City and North Bergen, right? But
there's a lot in Union County now also.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, they keep moving well to west.
So what they found out was that hashtag actually originated in Spain, if I'm not mistaken. And it was by a right-wing, I'm going to say bad actor, influencer, that's known to do what he does. And what they noticed was that the retweets of the hashtag SOS Cuba was happening at such a fast rate that wasn't humanly possible, right? And there was a lot of bot accounts that that really caused it to take off and go viral, because this is really sophisticated work we're talking about. We're not just talking about some people that are talking shit and lying.
I know.
We're talking about really sophisticated, organized machines, right? To the point where, and the purpose of that was to ultimately get the Cuban people on the island, not Miami, but on the island, to start to be more influenced by this and start taking a more anti-government stance, or causing that group that were out protesting to grow, to ultimately get to the point where they're going to have an revolution, whatever, you know what I'm saying? So, and then of course, Miami was just, in sync with it. They jumped on it, and their protests were legit, right? That's, anti-Castro protests. That's tradition in Miami. That's, we know about that. But to take that cultural trauma, right?
Yeah.
Even for the anti-Castro Cubans, right?
Yeah.
who that most of them are going about their day-to-day lives, right? They're not plotting to go back and overthrow the Cuban government, right?
Yeah.
Like they've moved on. It's a lot different than it was in the 90s and maybe the 70s. You know, a lot of them have moved on. And sure, they have anti-Castro groups or whatever, of course, you know, they or anti-revolution groups, but they've moved on. But then when that something like that happens, it taps into that trauma that maybe they didn't experience, but their parents, their grandparents experience, and whatever the reason why they were exiled or they left the island, they had to flee the island, whatever. That's trauma that's being tapped into, right? So that's just a big example. But then to expand it a little further, there are other Spanish-speaking populations coming from different countries. That's Venezuela, for instance. Also, I think, from my understanding, is a growing community in Florida, right? And when they're coming here, a lot of them are fleeing what they believe to be a dictatorship, right? Where one person is ruling, you know, and the people are suffering and they're enriching themselves or whatever, and they link it to socialism, whatever, without understanding, coming from another country that may not have the wide variety of media access and resources that we have, to understand that a lot of the reasons why the country may be suffering and there may be shortages of food and medical supplies is because your country or your region is heavily sanctioned by the United States Empire, right? Talking about Cuba as well. So coming over here, coming to Florida as refugees, as exiles or whatever, and the people that are there to greet them are the same people or the same type of people that are pumping this information in them, because they know that those people will potentially become U.S. citizens. They'll be able to vote, and they'll be able to vote, anti-communist, anti-socialist, revolution or whatever, and within consistent with the right-wing values of this country and all around the world. So that's how it's very effective, because it taps in, that's tapping into their trauma as well. So I wanted to just bring up those things from what I know as far as what's going on in, how misinformation and disinformation is being used in the Latino community and with Spanish-speaking groups in general.
Right. So far I talked about, I went over the poll that talks about Latino sentiment amongst those that are choosing to not be vaccinated. We talked a little bit about some historic voter suppression tactics that were basically done via mis and disinformation. So I talked about voter suppression. I talked about COVID-19 and Latinos that choose not to be vaccinated. And one of the things that came up was, especially in the poll, how Facebook was where the majority of this information was being obtained. We also know that Facebook has gotten a lot of pressure in terms of, putting things into place to do fact checking. And so this article from what Facebook knew about its Latino aimed disinformation problem. It's an article that was in the LA Times. And basically what it's saying is that Facebook understands that its AI, its consultants, all of the, bells and whistles that they've built in to do fact checking, to minimize mis and disinformation among the Latino community, within Spanish language material, to this day does not work. And I think it does have a lot to do with what you just said, that they try to lump us all into one, category. And it doesn't work. If you cannot put on at least 22 different sets of filters when you're thinking about the Latino community, you're not going to successfully be able to define us, identify us, relate to us, because that's how many Spanish-speaking countries there are in the Caribbean anyway. Spain is a European country. They speak Spanish, and that's a whole, like, just a whole other lifestyle. And anyway, so, and I'm gonna get into kind of a funny story while I'm reading through this, but sometimes the misinformation mirrored what the rest of the country was seeing. And this is in reference to like a lot of the information that Facebook was pulling off of, or should have been pulling off of. It was fear mongering about mail-in ballots, Antifa vigilantes, or conspiracy theories about the deep state and COVID-19. Other times it leaned into more Latino-specific concerns, such as comparing candidate Joe Biden to Latin American dictators, or claiming that Black Lives Matter activists are using brujeria. There it goes again. So, and so, again, brujeria is witchcraft. The same sort of themes that were showing up in English were also showing up in Spanish, but in English, they were getting flagged or taken down altogether. And in Spanish, they were being left up, or if they were taken down, it was taking days and days to take them down. So again, and then it goes on to say like they would meet with Facebook, and Facebook would just give them a whole bunch of so she says, we had a lot of specific questions and they just completely failed to answer. For instance, we asked them who's in charge of ensuring the integrity of content moderation in Spanish. They would not tell us the answer to that. Or even if that person existed, we asked how many content moderators do they have in Spanish? They refused to answer that question. How many people that moderate content in Spanish are based in the US? No answer. In the days leading up to the election, there were about 20 other advocacy groups, Latino-centric, that sent a combined letter to Zuckerberg criticizing his company's inaction and enablement of the targeting, manipulation, and disenfranchisement of Latino users during the election, despite repeated efforts by the signatories to alert him of their concerns. The next month, another internal report warned that Facebook had no policies to protect against targeted suppression. So for example, memes that said that ICE would be at the polls, alluding to concerns that Latino voters would be dissuaded from showing up to the vote if they were told falsely that immigration authorities would be present at polling sites. The report color-coded that concern bright red, high risk, low readiness on behalf of Facebook to tackle that. By election day, the company reported having removed more than 265,000 Facebook and Instagram posts, which violated its voter interference policies, and added warning labels to more than 180 million instances of fact-checked information. This is how they're coming at, we are under attack.
Oh, yeah.
The Latino community, but that's because we are the second largest group in this country, and our number says 18%.
That's not by accident.
So there's just a lot more here. That the one piece in particular that I actually experienced years ago on radio, where they say that because we all know this is AI, there's some consultants, they're live, but we don't really know how Facebook does this. I was in college and I used to babysit for one of my sorority sisters. And my brother-in-law, this is now my brother-in-law, we went to college together. I believe we were hanging out together. And we were listening to a Spanish radio show that's very popular, La Mega. They have their morning show. Then they would also have a show like around rush hour, while people were going home. There wasn't a whole lot of music. It was more talk, a lot of jokes. I used to listen to it all the time because it was funny. So I'm babysitting. He was there. We were hanging out. I think I was making dinner or whatever, waiting for my sorority sister to get home. And I'm listening to the show with him. They had a guy call in and they started a conversation with him. And again, they're joking, this and that. And the guy starts talking about how he, loves to smoke weed, and he just started. And now we start cracking up because we're like, and so first of all, my brother-in-law is not Spanish speaking. My brother-in-law is Italian. So I'm cracking up. He's like, okay, you got to explain to me what's going on. So I'm basically like translating for him real time. And he's like, Michelle, how are they talking about this on live radio? And I'm like, because it's in Spanish and the FAA can't keep up. That's just, and to this day, we still joke about it, but like, this is nothing new in the Latino community. There is a lot of stuff that we get away with because y'all can't keep up. But at the same time, that's a very powerful position to be in. And that's exactly why they throw all these stories at us. Oh, remember this, remember that. The last thing I'm gonna bring up, well, actually, did you want me to get into the Puerto Rico article? Because that's a very powerful, like okay, so we've established voter suppression, COVID vaccine, those are the two areas where they just have their knee on our necks proverbially, okay, because we are dying in record numbers of COVID because we won't get vaccinated. Interestingly enough, though, on the island of Puerto Rico, they've managed to have well over half of the population vaccinated. And so, yeah.
Puerto Rico.
So there's an article. Is this in the Times? How Puerto Rico achieved the highest vaccination rate in the US without a political fight. And it's real simple. They didn't politicize it. It wasn't a political thing at all. A bunch of scientists got together. They said, this is what we have to do. The governor made it happen. And it happened. And that was it. It's interesting, though. So one of the key targets of the scientific coalition was to head off misinformation about COVID-19 before it took hold in Puerto Rico. In the mainland US, vaccine misinformation targeted the Latino and Spanish-speaking communities had contributed to low vaccination rates. In Puerto Rico, the job is not done. There's still about 25% or so of the population that is not vaccinated. And this is mostly because they're either in hard-to-reach areas. There are still hard-to-reach areas in Puerto Rico. Some are elderly and isolated, so they don't have anyone to get them back and forth. And honestly, I'm not, there's a lot of need in Puerto Rico in terms of like, they don't have like senior services or whatever. And if they do have them, they're in the more populated metro area,
Not to forget that, that there's large portions of the island that are still ravaged from the effects of Hurricane Maria.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like, so yeah. And then there's some that have hardened ideas against vaccines and Washington's meddling in the past. And I'm just going to briefly explain what those two are specifically. So one is La Operación. And there's a documentary called La Operación. I've never seen it, but I've heard about it. Or actually, I may have seen it in college. And so the film details the origin and subsequent expansion of U.S. involvement in Puerto Rico. Citing that the island was overpopulated, the U.S. implemented many strategies to try and remedy the problem, all of which are showcased in this documentary. It's called La Operación, or The Operation. So there were different ways that the U.S. meddled. One of them was just getting people to, leave the island, right? And then one was family planning. And so what they did was that it was supposed to be where they encouraged women to, have their tubes tied. But the conversations were more like, you got to do it. And, there was a level of trust there. There was a lot going on, and so, yes, a lot of women submitted to it and unknowingly that this was irreversible. The other incident was the Puerto Rico pill trials. So when the pill was first invented, it was tested on women in Puerto Rico, and it was tested in, like doses that just were not good for humans. And so there was a lot, but these two incidents, I think La Operación started like in the 30s and 40s, and then the pill trials was more like 50s and 60s. But the pill trials only happened because the US government was like in this space already where we have to control the population on the islands, and so they allowed for the pill trials. And then that was an abuse of, big pharma and science. Oh, right. So again, these two things did happen in Puerto Rico. They were very isolated events. We know now that there is no way, patient bill of rights, informed consent, that any of this can ever happen again. And so there was just so much information that I got from these articles, and how mis and disinformation. The last thing I will say was with that whole Facebook thing, if I'm not mistaken, the National Council of La Raza, which now has a new name, they're called UnidosUS. They actually cut ties with Facebook because of, and so this includes returning a grant that they got from Facebook for the work that they do. They are a Latino rights and advocacy group. And I mean, I've known about National Council of La Raza. I didn't know that they changed their name until I read this article, but I've known about National Council of La Raza since I was, such a little rebel back in college. And for them to cut ties with Facebook and return a grant that was given to them by Facebook, because Facebook specifically cannot address the issues of the mis and disinformation targeting the Latino community. That for me says it all. Facebook needs to do more. We need to do more to be discerning, and at this point, I'll just take it upon myself really quickly, and then I'm going to throw it back to you to kind of share how I do it, and actually, I know we're going to get into that, but like for me, it's so easy on Facebook. If a picture looks fake, it probably is, people. Like, that's just the bottom line. If the headline is really fascinating, then you're probably right. It's really fascinating and it's not true. But anyway, again, it's those triggers. I'm going to kick it back to you because I'm going to keep going off. You got me in my feelings with this Puerto Rico talk.
Listen,
but at the end of the day, the last thing I do want to say is that I loved how in Puerto Rico, it was a group of scientists. It was a team of scientists that got together and spearheaded the whole thing. And then they went to the government, and the government was like, that's what you need? Then that's what we're going to do, And when I went to the island recently, it was none of the Puerto Ricans that were not wearing masks. It was none of the Puerto Ricans that had a problem with showing their vaccine card or doing anything. It was everybody else that had that problem, So that's what I got.
That was a lot. It was a lot.
It was a lot because
I'm very thoroughly satisfied.
We're very targeted as a community, and we it's so easy to like read something and be like, oh yeah, we really have to consider this. But context, my people, context. Am I proud that this happened in Puerto Rico? No, I'm not. It's something I'm very aware of that happens, but like, we got to move on, and we have to be in context. We're not talking about just a germ on the island. This is global. So
yeah. And just in response to all the great and detailed information that you just presented, was a reason why that I've been talking to you about this subject for a couple of years now, because I know you, and I especially knew, if you knew how how Latino communities, especially Puerto Ricans, are being targeted by this disinformation. I knew once you took a deeper dive in it that there were going to be emotions behind it, and I know that you were going to go in. And I trust that this is not the last I'm going to hear from you on these issues.
I just want to also mention, not too long ago, I was looking at a map because there was a surge with Omicron, right? And so I was looking at a map of what's going on with the country in terms of COVID. and it included Puerto Rico. And I took a video of it and I posted it on Facebook, and it got me attacked for being a misinformer or a disinformer. I was being accused of being a bad actor.
Is that by the algorithm or by your people on your page?
So let me.
Oh.
So I just went and I hovered real quick, and I showed what I was looking at. The entire island of Puerto Rico was like blood red, not even fire engine red.
There
It
goes
was
that
like
red again.
burgundy. and
Fire.
Yeah. And then like I went up where so that people could see what they were looking at, right? Then I just talk about how I saw a map. It had all these colors. I didn't know what the colors meant. I showed the map. I showed what the colors meant. And, I said, like, it's bad. It's bad in Puerto Rico right now. And it makes me want to cry because I understand the impact this could potentially have on the hospital systems, which are already so very fragile on the islands.
Right.
And so that's what I said. And maybe I could have put a little more in my caption. I don't know. But I was accused of, well, that's not what's happening on the island. Okay, so these are numbers that get reported on a regular basis. I work in the medical field. It's not really, I'm not frontline. I'm more statistics, admin type stuff, but I see numbers, I know who these numbers have to be reported to. Mm-hmm. My concern is actually that they're being underreported.
Yeah.
So they're like, oh, it's not that bad. Okay, so are you telling me that because what we were looking at was active reported numbers of positive cases on a daily basis? That's what was being reported. But that's not what's happening. Well, how do you know that people aren't testing positive? We all already know that you can be completely asymptomatic and be positive. So how do you know that what I'm showing you is not the truth? Based on what I'm hearing in the news, what I'm reading, what I myself am experiencing, since 85% of my family had it all at the same time. You know what I'm saying? Like, it seems pretty spot on to me. And then, then what, like this person just, first of all, they didn't understand what I was sharing with them. They didn't take the time to say, okay, this is the number of positive cases, and then listen to what I had said. I understand the impact this could have on the
because they were in fast brain.
Yes, they were.
They didn't pause.
They were. Yes, they were. And I also suspect that they are anti-vax. And, so I was just like, no, I'm also not going to allow if I'm going to put information out there, I'm going to put the truth in your face. And you don't like it because that you could potentially be contributing to these numbers. You know what I'm saying? And you're doing nothing about it. So then, but there are some times where when you try to untangle the facts for people from the stories that make them mis and disinformation, you come out to be the bad guy. But that's why we do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you know what?
Shut up.
I'm not looking to necessarily, I don't need to be a good guy. You know what I'm saying? I'll be the bad guy if it's going to make some type of dent into what we, a dent into this machine, because we're dealing with a machine practically when it comes to this disinformation. And as far as how like being responding to people that combating what we're offering, here you are, you have a post that it's not just a screenshot of some simple jargon or whatever, like you're breaking down stuff and you have your sources there or whatever. And so not only do you have someone that's in fast brain that just quickly scanned it and is reacting to whatever they're reacting to, whatever it is that's triggering them. And then, like you did, and like I often do, I'll be like, okay, I hear what you're saying, where are you getting it from?
And that's what I asked.
Yeah,
and that's what I asked. I was
show
like,
me,
what?
because I don't, and because if there's a chance that some of my information may be off, whether it's slightly off or way off, I want to know. I want to know. I got no problem saying, wow, I just learned something from what you just sent me, you know.
But now the way this person responded when I asked with, well, how do you know? Because he was like, oh, you're wrong, or whatever he said. And I was like, well, how do you know? And then from there, it went into just really,
it went downhill.
I'm back in second grade. I know you are, but what am I? And then right there, I knew that I was not dealing with a person who is in their pause, much less just because, like, come on, who does that word though? It's like, he just started to get into like this personal attack. And I was like, I'm not doing that.
I mean, that's the defense mechanism kicking in to where there's a void of valid information and sources, right?
Yes.
Because they have not, you asked him, like, where are you getting that from? And when you have no answer, right? And when you're not immediately able to refer to a source, a site, an article, or whatever, then the immediate reaction is to start becoming hostile.
So what he said was, because he lives over there. So he was like, that's not what's going on over here. And I was like, okay, well, how do you know? Like, are you the person in Puerto Rico that sends these numbers in? Like, is that how you know? Because if that's the case, then you sent in the wrong numbers, because that's what I'm saying. You know, like, I was just really trying to get to, you know, like, is it because you wake up, you open your eyes and you don't see all the red dots that you don't like? It was just so, Anyway.
And the general response is, nuh-uh. Nuh-uh. And it's like, okay,
so ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean,
once it got into the personal attacks, I already knew that this was something different.
He was already dismantled. Like, it was
done.
You know,
I was like,
this
is something different going on here, and I'm not interested.
So just to touch on a few more things before we move on to possible solutions on how to combat cultural disinformation. Something that I wanted to touch on before was an article, I believe it was ABC News, that was highlighting how members of the Black community, particularly the Somalian community, how anti-vaxxers were, or the anti-vax movement were targeting them with disinformation to influence them. And because, let's be clear, anti-vax movements have been around for generations, right? For centuries even. And so they broke down how, you know, how they were targeting and how they were looking for recruits, legit Black faces for their movement to be able to reach Black and brown communities. And they tried to recruit a woman named Harriet Washington. And she is an author of a book called, and I happen to have it right here, Medical Apartheid, right? The book is about the dark history of medical experimentation on Black Americans from colonial times to the present. So this woman is very well aware of the trauma that the Black and African American folks have experienced. And she was also able to spot the bullshit when they were trying to use stuff that she's extensively researched to coerce her, right? So, because they were trying to get her to speak at events and go to conventions and all the, you know, everything that they do as part of the movement. I'm mentioning this article not for that simple, amazing fact right there, but I want to highlight that this article was written in 2019, pre-COVID. We weren't, when this article was written, we weren't even thinking about COVID. I think when they were referring to the Somalian community, I think it might have been referring to measles or something. I'm not sure what it was. It wasn't nothing at a pandemic level, but or certain populations that were vulnerable because they didn't, because of their own reasons, their own trauma, and they were skeptical of vaccinations. But to go a little further on anti-vax and talking about marginalized groups, because it's not limited to people of color, and it's not only people of color that have experienced trauma throughout history that could be tapped into and can make them vulnerable to disinformation. So I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm sure you've noticed, because like it's so obvious that this whole anti-mask and anti-vaccination stance and movement, there's a overuse and misuse of references to Nazis and Nazi Germany, which is definitely a trigger. It definitely triggers emotions. It triggers trauma. Obviously, they weaponize the Holocaust. They comparing vaccine mandates and mask mandates to what happened in Nazi Germany. Now, to tap into, first of all, we're going to acknowledge that part of the era, the Nazi Germany era, there was medical experimentation taking place on people, on women, on Jewish people, on Jews. That's undeniable. But to be able to take that fact and then tie it into something that's not true, and first of all, it's amazing to me. Tell me if you saw this. I think it was in 2020 when they really started going heavy on this whole referencing or this equivalence to Nazis and Nazi Germany. There was a couple that went into a Walmart that had an anti-mask policy in place, right? Like it wasn't a choice, like especially back then, 2020, it wasn't a choice. So there was a couple that had Nazi flags as masks, right? To kind of make a statement, like, first of all, like we are equivalizing this policy in Walmart to be that of Nazi Germany, right? Second of all, excuse me, you just happen to have Nazi flags on hand, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you just happen to have that, like, to use as a prop to make your point. Like, how many of us have Nazi flags, like, in arm's length? So I thought that was interesting. And even if you went and ordered them, like that to go that length where you're gonna order Nazi flags to make your statement. But I wanted to highlight an article in Jacobin magazine that was very interesting to me. This was back in, I believe it's September of 2021, this article was put out. And they were talking about the actual Nazi vaccine policy, right? So they highlight that there was a vaccine mandate, so to speak, in Germany prior to the Nazis taking power. It was in place. And they talked about the Nazi vaccine policy that relaxed the requirements of, right? So that flies in the face of this nonsense that's being presented. But the
thing is that if people would do everything that we're saying, right? Like just
right.
This is what you're gonna find.
We're acknowledging, yes.
That's smart.
Yeah, we're acknowledging, yes, there were atrocities committed by the Nazis, as far as, medical experimentation on people that led to a lot of death, particularly, like I said, Jewish people, mental health, people with mental health conditions.
That's the one area of history, that's the one time period in history that has always dually fascinated and broken my heart all at the same time. And maybe the reason why I'm fascinated by it is because I can't believe that something like that took place.
Right.
We're definitely going to talk about that because
there's much.
I have a friend, that's another podcast, because I have a friend whose brother lives out there, and she's the one who told me that in Germany, you talk about the Holocaust and these people are like, They're like, oh my God, like they see it as a period in their history that they are so ashamed of.
Yeah,
Their kids learn about it.
they
So when we
do.
talk about CRT, we're
Right.
gonna,
Yeah,
but go ahead.
we're
Go
gonna
ahead.
get into that definitely,
Mm-hmm.
especially with CRT. But
Mm-hmm.
what's
Go ahead.
also interesting in Germany now, that there is a neo-Nazi movement in Germany and in a lot of parts of the world in Europe. And the
Mm-hmm.
neo-Nazi movement are also attached to the anti-vax movement in Germany. So you know, here we have the people in this country that are referring to vaccine mandates as, you know, not Nazi-ish, let's say, right, as a form of Nazism. And then again, you have legit Nazis in Germany and in around Europe right now that are part of the anti-vax movement, right? So like, which is it? Like, come on, make up your mind. But to go further into the Nazi vaccine policy that was put in place when the Nazis took over in Germany, they point out in the article in the Jacobin magazine that the vaccine mandates were not consistent with the Nazi genocidal goals, right? If you had mandates to save people's lives, why would they want that all across the board, you know, in Nazi Germany when they specifically recognized certain groups as undesirable and inferior? You know,
Mm-hmm.
why would we want to save them if the
Mm-hmm.
goal is to get rid of them? Right?
Right.
Makes perfect sense to me anyway.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
so there's a quote from the article, and it says withholding compulsory vaccination and other German public health innovations would help kill more of the undesirables and inferior people who they wanted to get rid of from the world.
Mm-hmm.
Now, just think about today in a so-called civilized society that we have now, right? Compared to Nazi Germany and World War II times,
Right.
where to come out and say that we don't want certain groups to have vaccinations and access to life-saving science because we feel that they're undesirable and inferior. That's a problem in today's day and age, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not saying that that's not what people think or whatever. But to verbalize,
They can't say it.
yeah, that's you know,
They
that's
can't
out
say
of
it.
question.
They can, but they won't.
Yeah, right. They won't, because it won't do much for their cause, you know,
Exactly.
if they were to come out. But imagine if instead of having to say it, we can pump people with misinformation and disinformation to a point where they voluntarily withhold the life-saving science from themselves.
Exactly. The freedom
Brilliant.
to choose.
Right. The freedom
your
to
death.
choose. Remember what they did to you in Tuskegee.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Remember the sterilization of the Puerto Rican women.
Yes.
Right? And then next thing you know, you got large amounts of people in marginalized groups that are responding to that and saying, no, I'm not going to take that because I know it's going to be bad for me. And how do I know it? Because there's a history of medical experimentation that's been detrimental to my people, right? And they voluntarily withhold and deny themselves the life-saving
Let's
vaccination.
not even talk about how all these bad actors are probably vaccinated.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, just to keep it 100, right?
Yeah.
All anti-vaxxers are
vaccinated.
Yeah, no, I'm saying like there's plenty of them that are vaccinated.
Yeah.
Right. Candace Owens is said to be one of them. Like she's an anti-vaxxer.
He won't admit it, but
yeah, because I mean, that's not not a good look.
All your money and your job
Trump is pro-vax openly, admittedly pro-vax. That's causing a whole
he invented them.
Yeah,
he invented the vaccines.
Why would he?
If it wasn't for him, we wouldn't be alive right now.
I just think it's interesting, and just to get people to pause and think about if there was a possibility that this is being done by design in order to kill yourself off, right? To get rid of you, because we already know, you already went through the stats on the impact of COVID with the Latino community and the Black African American community, which are at disproportionate rates compared to the dominant group, right?
Yeah.
So,
and we even have a little glimpse into what's happening with the Filipino community.
Right.
We know that, and they're on the low end of those numbers. So yeah.
Especially at a time where the demographics are changing. It's a perfect time.
Oh,
a perfect time to get you to off yourself.
Yeah.
According to confusion and misinformation that you've consumed in a lot of these social media outlets, mainly Facebook. Facebook is a fucking cesspool. And I always say that. And the only reason why some of you may see me on Facebook right now is because of this podcast. Because I usually deactivate my shit. And you might not, you'll see me pop up in like a year or so. And then I deactivate it again after like a week or two. But the only reason why, because the podcast is doing very well on our podcast page, you know, but I try to keep my engagement with Facebook limited because it's still a cesspool. And briefly, before we get to possible solutions, I just want to mention that, Facebook, they could definitely do more, and they know they could do more. And it's just a question of a matter of profit. Like, what is it going to be profitable to do more?
Yes.
You know, that's the main thing, because it all comes down to the capitalism.
Yep,
right?
absolutely.
It's all about profit over people. So, you know, they definitely going to respond to what's more profitable. But you said it, we have the responsibility. That's why we're talking about this right now. That's why we're constantly bringing it up and attaching it to other topics in our shows, because we have to do something. We just can't be irresponsible media consumers that doesn't click on the article, that doesn't read the article, that claims that they don't have time, but they'll spend the rest of their day scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, you know, but you don't have time. You know, everybody has time to pause. Everybody could take 15 minutes out a day to learn something that they didn't know, to click on something or follow a source or reach out to somebody and say, hey, I'm looking for some information on this. And I know that you've been talking about it and you're somewhat familiar. Help me out with that. I mean, come on, like, you know, because when you think about it, these strategies, this misinformation, disinformation strategies are very, it's laziness that's attached to it. It's laziness and it's cost effective.
That's what they count on. They count on you being lazy. They count on you not doing your homework. That's how what they do works, you know? And again, let's not get it twisted, people. This has always existed. This has always existed. But what Scott said in the beginning was that because the speed of the information and how it's getting out there puts more onus on us to really have to weed out. And I'll be honest with you, I'm with him, but for different reasons. I find it overwhelming to go on Facebook and social media and just absorb all this information, because my brain knows that now it knows that I need to pick and choose. What am I focusing on? What am I not? Because I am just not spending valuable energy on something that's not true.
That's how I got into so much reading, because reading replaces wasted social media time, right? Because it's very easy for hours to go by without you even realizing that you just been looking at that phone and scrolling and scrolling and reading, right? Because that's what we're looking at pictures, but we're reading captions, right? So the fast brain is going when I could just be reading shit, you know, and tuning out from those distractions and that nonsense. So how do we arm ourselves? What do we do? Because we're not just gonna say this is what it is and it's horrible and not try to offer
a solution,
some possible solution. So what you and I are gonna finish up with, we're gonna review the crap. We're gonna give you some crap. And
this crap? That's so when you see information, you're going to ask yourself, is this crap? And what does crap stand for?
Right. So first, let's spell it out. It's called the CRAP method, and it's CRAAP for crap. And what that is it's a tool to evaluate information, just as simple as that. It's not super complicated. It doesn't take high education levels and, you know, extensive levels of intelligence, but it's broken down, and CRAP stands for currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose. So I'll take the first one and we'll break it down. So currency, according to the CRAP method, is when was the information created? How old is it? Is it too, I mean, how old is too old? Does the currency of the information matter? Has the material been updated or revised? So some examples they give is an article on cancer treatments written in 1970, historical analysis of the Revolutionary War written in 1982, a book on computer programming written in 1995. What I can say about this part is this is very important, because you can take old, accurate news and present it in today's day and age, which will have no bearing and be completely it could be complete misinformation according to how something was 25 years ago or last century, like we were talking about with Nazi Germany. You want to take the next one?
I don't think we're looking at the same thing. So go ahead, I'll let you do the rundown.
Okay, so the next one is relevance. R for relevance. Is the information related to your research? Does the information support your assignment? Do you look at only one source? Who is this written for? And some examples, Popular Magazine article, the first 5 results in a Google search. We talked about this a while back.
Yes, we
talked
did.
about that. Is your research limited to the first 5 ads that pop up on your Google search? Because they're ads. We talked about this is ads. Yeah. They're paid to be on the top 5.
I dare you to Google something, scroll all the way down to where it shows you the 5 million pages of results that you got. Click on the one that takes you to because I think it shows you 6 pages at a time, 6 or 7 pages. Go to the next 6 or 7 set. Click on one of those pages.
Yeah.
Go to one of those sources and see
or start page 5 and move backwards to the front.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Like that's what I'm saying. Like go deep.
Yeah.
Go deep into the research, because I'm telling you, get a lot of results depending.
Or for people that just don't have the time to do all that, you can look at the first 5 sources and see that there's a little character next to each one of them that says ad. I dare you right now. If you listen to this right now, do a Google search and look
anything. On anything.
Do a Google search on anything. Look, Google search disinformation, cultural disinformation. Right? So the next one is authority. Who or what created the information? Who or what is publishing the information? What credentials, education, affiliations, or experience does the information creator have to write on a topic? Can you find information about the author easily? What can we tell from the domain of the website where the information has been published? You talked about this a while back, about being able to click on the author and get a bio, not only about the credentials and education of the author, but being able to see other work, other writing that they've done. The domain of the website, this perfect example, yesterday on our Facebook WWIU page, so I commented on an article about anti-vaxxers and unvaccinated, which I believe to be not the same thing, right?
Yes.
And someone responded to me that has some irrelevant nonsense. It wasn't no big deal, but I went onto their page because that's what I do, see, what they're working with, where they're at. And they had a post, it was about Rittenhouse, matter of fact. And the post was talking about one of the people that he killed. And the post was a screenshot of supposedly that person's criminal record. So there's a screenshot in Wisconsin, I believe, and there's a bunch of charges and dates or whatever. Naturally, we can't click on it because it's a screenshot, but the person didn't crop out the address, the URL from where they got that screenshot. And it wasn't from, it wasn't from ProPublica, it wasn't from CNN or whatever. It was from a blog belonging to a militia group. So is that a trustworthy source? I get it that, it feels good to associate yourself with people that share your values and your thoughts or whatever. People find comfort in the echo chambers. But when we're talking about information like that, is that really where we want to be getting our information from? Not only from to educate ourselves, but to pass it on.
I put something out there earlier because I saw something that really spoke to me, in my fast brain. And so I clicked on it and, it took me to the site that was selling it. And I want to say for the last two years at the very least, I've even been doing that before I purchase anything. I work hard at my job. We all do, and we do this because we want to create certain lives for ourselves, right? Whatever that is, where you want to live, what kind of car you want to drive, how you want to provide for your family. That's kind of what drives the work that you do and how much you get paid to do it and all that, right? Like, if we're going to keep it real on the surface, and I'm not going to send my money to support someone's lifestyle that may be killing my community. That's just the bottom line.
For real.
You know what I'm saying? I need to know what you're doing with the money that I'm giving you. And if I had $10 for every time that I said, I'm not buying this because I don't know who I am purchasing it from, I could take you and me out for a lot of fish tacos because I don't need it. I don't need it. If you can't show me your face and who you are, then I don't need it. A lot of this has to do with cultural appropriation for me too, because, that's something else to buy my, like my stuff for my altar or whatever. Like I know where that originates from. And no Karen, no Kathy, I'm not going to buy my Palo Santo from you. You know what I'm saying?
And like that falls within the digital blackface. In a sense, right? The same concept. Yes. That, excellent.
So I did post something earlier on Facebook, just asking people, before you make an online purchase, do you look to see who you're purchasing from? Do you know what energy you are entertaining and feeding into by virtue of an exchange of money? Or like, is there some larger anti-vax group that's going to get paid? Like, I don't know. And if you can't tell me, then I can't support you. Then I don't need that t-shirt or whatever. Go ahead. I'll let you continue.
And thank you. And because we're going to wrap this up, we've been rocking this for a minute. It's been great. But just to touch on what you were saying, and that doesn't only apply to online, because I have an issue with to blindly support small businesses. Like, just because they're a small business, we need to support them. No, the fuck we don't. No, we don't.
Who are these people?
I don't care.
Are they gentrifying our neighborhood?
Right. Well, not only that, they could be a black business that's subscribing to disinformation.
Yes.
And putting it out there. They could be pushing the Brexit or the walk away hashtag. Right. I don't care. I'm not supporting that. So definitely, I feel you on that. Next one is accuracy. Is the information factual? Has it been peer reviewed? Is the information supported by evidence? Does the author credit their sources? Hello, like, where's the source?
Yeah.
And even if you're not the author, but you are sharing it, and someone asked you for the source, right? Source.
Could you get it?
Right.
Right. Did you get it?
Like, first of all, we're highlighting that you didn't get a source from the original creator of that meme, that screenshot, or whatever it is. And we're also highlighting that they didn't have a source cited on, you know what I'm saying? So that should be red flags automatically. If you go onto a website and you read an article, and at the beginning of that article, like we said, you don't have the bio of the author, you don't have other works of the author, you can't scroll down to the end and get the original source of or the list of citations that they use, which
That's a blog. That's not an article.
Right. Because let me tell you something, like in the essay that we started with that I read from, right. And with most essays that have put, that are what I would call legitimate, or a legitimate amount of research went into it. Once you get to the bottom and you get to that list of resources, that citation page, that's the jackpot right there.
Right.
Yeah. That's where you do your further research, right? I've gotten books and many of other essays written when I'm feeling the content, or when I want to interrogate and unpack the content. I'm going to go to their sources, and I'm going to read through them. And sometimes there are a lot of sources. Literally, you can't go through 50, 75 sources or whatever, but you can go through and pick the ones that have raised your interest, that piqued your interest, or raised red flags, and search them further and find out, you know what I'm saying? Because I mean, I don't expect everyone to do that, but just keep in mind that if you're really trying to get to the truth, if you're really trying to find some facts, if you're really trying to find some supporting evidence, then it's going to require a little bit of work.
Right.
At least,
or at the very least, if you're not willing to do the work, then guess what? That little share button, you don't got to hit that.
Right.
You can just keep it to yourself.
Don't be lazy, right? Don't be lazy and share, because there's been times where, and that's not to say that I've never shared any misinformation myself, because I'm like, but
that's how we learn. And that's why we're here talking about, because we were told about ourselves.
When I first got hit to this whole, misinformation, disinformation thing, first thing I had to do was take a look at myself and see how I've been conned and duped, and how people have preyed on my anxieties for whatever reason, and triggering my emotions. So it also includes a self-assessment. This is about a self-assessment,
Absolutely.
All right. So we're moving on to, lastly, purpose. Why?
Did we do the other A? What did we do? Accuracy?
I skipped one, didn't I? Oh, I did. I'm sorry. I skipped authority.
Okay.
Authority.
Okay, there you go.
I did authority. Who or what created the information? What are their credentials, education?
Oh, okay, yes. Yeah. Sorry.
So I did that. And lastly, we have purpose. Why was the information created to begin with? Was the information created to inform, to teach, to sell, to entertain, or persuade you? Has the purpose been made clear? Those are very, very important questions. And there's something that they highlight, and it says it's a note to remember. Information can have political, ideological, cultural, religious, institutional, or personal bias. Is it fact, opinion, or propaganda? Now, I'm glad the purpose of this, that we're ending with the purpose of this. And some examples they're giving is an article written by Apple about the picture quality of an iPhone. Like, hello, there's an obvious bias there. So, when someone's selling you their product, they may not necessarily saying that they're lying to you, but some of the features may be exaggerated, let's say a little bit, which is nothing wrong with that. It's all how you interpret it. And if you don't do the research and you're lazy about it, then you're going to fall victim to it,
Right.
So I wanted to close with mentioning that I'm gonna speak for myself. You can speak for yourself. I'm clearly not trying to portray an image that I'm non-biased in any way. Like, I made it clear that, like, I don't lean to the left. I stand firm on the left of the political spectrum. So that's to be made clear. But I also want to say that this topic is a non-biased topic. This is a non-partisan topic. Yes, a lot of the stuff that we're highlighting seems to be the bad actors seem to be on one side of the spectrum, but I should also highlight that propaganda, misinformation is not limited to the right side of the political spectrum, and it's not to also say that all propaganda is lies,
Right.
It just may be heightened and exaggerated to get people to open their eyes and start to lean another way when it comes to their thinking and their beliefs. But,
Right.
So I don't, because people tune out right away. They will turn this off because they hear us talking about certain, anti-revolution Cubans in Miami or whatever, and they'll
voter
turn this,
suppression.
voter suppression issues that are usually brought up by the left, and they'll tune it out and dismiss it and say, oh, that's bias or whatever. So if before you do that, I just want to acknowledge that although it seems to be coming from a certain direction a lot, that it's not limited to that. Because I don't know if you remember, but some months back, speaking on Cuba, matter of fact, there's a group in Cuba that we started following that started, reporting what was going on in Cuba instead of getting the word from Miami. It seemed to confirm a lot of our suspicions, right? So we were like, and then kind of took it to another level. We were like, wow, like it's really that deep. And then I don't know if you remember, but I kind of text you and I was like, what if we're falling into pro-revolution propaganda that's being, and I remember you said, well, I thought about that too. And I checked this and this and this and this. And, I'm going to say it seems to be pretty legit or whatever, because you paused, right? And my pause was to present that question. Like, how about if we're, and not to say that.
But the questions are good because that's where you start to dig deeper and where you really start to get to, the meat and potatoes, to the fact of the matter, but once again, I'm going to repeat what I said in the beginning, is that the news, watching the news, listening to the news. I remember when someone was like, what do you mean you don't listen to the news? How do you know what's going on in the world? Why do I need to know what's going on in the world if I cannot directly impact it? I don't know what's going on with my neighbor, and I'm not being all up in their business. Maybe I should be. Let me concern myself with what I can impact. I think that a lot of people watch the news to make themselves feel good about themselves. I know what's going on in the world. Okay, but what are you doing about it? If you're not impacting, it doesn't matter that you know. It's like a security blanket for them. And so for them to hear that the news or that this or that an article, well, it looked like an article and the website looked legit. No, honey, it's a 16-year-old in Wisconsin who got a new laptop and knows HTML code. You know what I'm saying? And like I said, if you don't have sources, it's probably a blog. But that's where that media literacy comes in, and people don't want to know that what they've trusted, the sources they've trusted, what looks legit to them is not. It's like pulling the rug out from under them, and it does something to someone's psyche. I get it, but
speaking of 16-year-olds, not just necessarily a 16-year-old that got a new laptop, but a team of 16-year-olds that are working out of a loft somewhere or working out of a basement in a country in South America that are specifically paid to pump disinformation into the internet stream. Because don't think that doesn't happen. I suggest you look into troll farms and really understand how this machine operates. We're not just talking about some politicians or some right wingers that are just lying to people online. We're talking about organized effort here, and that's being bankrolled, heavily bankrolled.
And as Latinos, as being the second largest population in this country, we need to be careful about how the information that's being put out there, seemingly for our own good, is really killing us. It's killing us, to recap. So anyway.
All right. So let's just take a deep breath.
That was a deep conversation.
Yeah.
And there's gonna be a lot more, because I really feel like this is our focus.
Yeah, our
focus is totally about media literacy, pointing out all the different areas where, so today we talked about cultural mis and disinformation, and
that's the focus, because we started off with talking about why the media literacy and the mis and disinformation preys on and exploits people's vulnerabilities according to trauma that's been experienced by a certain group. So that's always going to be the foundation, regardless of what topics we talk about. When we talk about which way is up, because we're trying to provide some type of clarity, or we're all trying to find clarity ourselves, you and I, along with the listeners. So that's the foundation of the show. So as I exhale, we
Thank you for that, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you for that. It was great.
Fun.
We want to thank everybody, thank all the listeners and the viewers now, and remind you that you can click on our link tree, which will be posted in the notes section of the podcast, and we will also be including a series of sources for everything that we discussed, a lot of the articles that we mentioned.
One more thing before we sign off. Go. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Scott.
Choo-choo.
Happy birthday to you. Okay, I just have
Thank you. Applause. Yesterday was a birthday, my birthday week. We got snowed in, and I thought I had COVID in my mind for a minute, so it was an interesting week. But thank you for that. I appreciate it, and I appreciate all the birthday wishes on the WWIU page, because you did you gave me shout outs on every platform. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. I got that's the one time you get caught up in the Facebook fuckery with the birthday wishes. I've seen people like me that deactivate their account and activate it around their birthday just to get that experience. Talk about the bullshit, right? But everybody that wished me love on my personal Facebook page, thank you for that. And I think it's about that time, right?
Yeah.
So until next time.
This is Michi.
And this is Scott.
Good night.